In 1977, Mary Tyler Moore did something almost nobody in the history of American television had ever done before or has done since. At the absolute peak of her career, with the most critically acclaimed show on the air, she walked away. Not because she was fired, not because the ratings had slipped, not because there was a scandal or a blow-up or a network fight. She chose to end it on her own terms while it was still perfect. What followed that decision? The disasters, the grief, the drinking, the slow unraveling of the very image she had spent 2 decades building is a part of the story that never made it into the tributes. This is the full version. Mary Tyler Moore was born on December 29, 1936, in Brooklyn, New York, the eldest of 3 children in a Catholic household that relocated to Los Angeles when she was 8 years old. Her childhood was not a happy one by her own account. Her mother, Marjorie, struggled with alcoholism, a detail that would echo loudly decades later in Moore's own life, and the household was emotionally cold in ways that left marks she carried for years. She was a shy, introverted child who found her confidence in dance, taking lessons obsessively and dreaming of a performing career from an early age. She attended Immaculate Heart High School in Los Angeles, graduated in 1955, and married her first husband, Richard Carlton Meeker, the same year at age 18. She was already pregnant. Their son, Richard, called Richie, was born in 1956. The early years of her career were modest and unglamorous. She did commercial work, appeared briefly as a dancing elf called Happy Hot Point in the appliance commercials that aired during the Ozzie and Harriet show, and took small television parts that paid the bills without building anything. Her marriage to Meeker fell apart. They divorced in 1961, and she left Richie largely in the care of others while she pursued work with a focus that her son would, years later, describe in terms that suggested it had cost him something. That same year, 1961, she married television executive Grant Tinker, a partnership that would prove more professionally durable than romantically lasting. The role that changed everything arrived in 1961 when she was cast as Laura Petrie, the wife of Rob Petrie, in the Dick Van Dyke Show. Laura Petrie was not like any television wife who had come before her. She wore capri pants instead of house dresses. She had opinions. She cried, not delicately, but with full-face, undignified abandon, a comic choice that became one of the show's most beloved running gags. She was funny in a way that didn't require her to be the butt of the joke. For 5 seasons, the show was one of the finest comedies on American television, and Moore's performance was central to everything that worked about it. When it ended in 1966, she was one of the most recognized faces in the country and had 2 Emmy Awards to show for it. What came next was a detour before the main event. She attempted a film career with mixed results, starred in a Broadway musical called Breakfast at Tiffany's that closed after only 4 preview performances and became one of the legendary disasters of 1960s theater, and generally struggled to find a vehicle that fit her the way Dick Van Dyke had. Then, in 1970, she and Grant Tinker created MTM Enterprises and launched the Mary Tyler Moore Show. It was a different kind of television entirely. Mary Richards, the character she played, was a single woman in her 30s who had come out of a broken engagement, moved to Minneapolis, and built a career as a television news producer. She wasn't waiting for a husband. She wasn't defined by her relationships. She was simply and radically, for 1970, a woman whose life was her own. The show ran for 7 seasons, won 29 Emmy Awards, and fundamentally changed what a female character on American television was allowed to be. In 1977, with the show at the peak of its cultural authority, Mary Tyler Moore called the cast and crew together and told them she was ending it. The decision was hers. She has said since that she felt the show had achieved everything it set out to do and that she didn't want to watch it decline. She wanted it to end while it was still the best thing on television. The finale aired on March 19, 1977, and drew one of the largest audiences in television history. It was, by any measure, a perfect exit. Then came 1978, and what happened next stands as one of the most spectacular professional collapses in television history. CBS gave Moore a primetime variety special simply called Mary, a format she had no particular background in, built around sketches and musical numbers that played against everything the audience loved about her. Critics were not unkind. They were savage. The Hollywood Reporter called it one of the worst programs ever broadcast on a major network. 3 episodes aired. CBS canceled it before the 4th. Moore later admitted the whole venture had been a catastrophic misjudgment, that she had walked into a format she didn't understand and couldn't save, and that the failure shook her confidence in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had chosen to leave television at its highest point and had come back to one of its lowest. The contrast was brutal and very public. The personal blows that followed were worse. On October 14, 1980, Richie Meeker, her son from her first marriage, 24 years old, died from an accidental self-inflicted gunshot wound at his apartment in Los Angeles. He had been handling a firearm carelessly and it discharged. He died almost instantly. Moore has spoken about the aftermath only in fragments, in interviews spread across decades, none of which add up to a complete account of what losing him cost her. What is documented is that in the immediate wake of his death, she threw herself into the filming of Ordinary People, Robert Redford's devastating debut as a director, in which she played Beth Jarrett, a cold, emotionally withholding mother who cannot reach her surviving son after a family tragedy. It was the furthest thing imaginable from Mary Richards. She was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress. Many of the people closest to her believe she was playing grief in a costume, channeling something she had no other outlet for. The drinking that had been a background issue for years moved to the foreground. Moore has been candid in later years about the fact that alcohol had been part of her life since early adulthood, that it escalated through the stress years, and that by the early 1980s, it had become something she could no longer manage quietly. She checked into the Betty Ford Center in 1984. She has spoken about that decision as one of the most important she ever made. It worked. She achieved sobriety and maintained it. But the period leading up to it had exacted real damage, personally and professionally, and the career she returned to afterward never looked quite like the one she had left. She worked consistently through the 1980s and 1990s, television films, Broadway appearances, a return to series television with Mary in 1985 that was canceled after 1 season, guest appearances that drew on the goodwill accumulated over 3 decades. None of it added up to the defining second act she deserved. She became increasingly a public advocate for type 1 diabetes research. She had been diagnosed in 1969 and managed the condition her entire career, and that advocacy became, in some ways, the most impactful work of her later years. Her marriage to Dr. Robert Levine, a cardiologist she married in 1983, gave her a stability her earlier partnerships hadn't. But the show that had defined her, the one she had chosen to end rather than diminish, remained the thing everyone mentioned first when her name came up. Nothing after it quite filled the space it had left. Mary Tyler Moore died on January 25, 2017, in Greenwich, Connecticut. She was 80 years old. The cause was cardiopulmonary arrest, with type 1 diabetes as a contributing factor. The tributes that followed were enormous and universal, full of clips from the Dick Van Dyke Show and the Mary Tyler Moore Show, full of the image of her tossing a hat in the air in Minneapolis at the start of every episode of the series that had made her an icon. The hat toss, the grin, the woman who could turn the world on with her smile, as the theme song promised.